for a couple of reasons. I named it Mawlawi's take on Sham, and in particular I named it my take on Sham because it's not a dars of ʿilm. There are a lot of things that I'm going to talk about that have moving parts, things that are not 100% clear, but just because you don't know everything to the level of aqeedah doesn't mean that you're not allowed to or not even supposed to try to figure it out. Life is kind of like that. Things happen, they come fast. It's important for a person to know what they know and what they don't know in order to kind of mitigate the guesswork in making important decisions in life. And thank the Lord, alhamdulillah, mashallah, for those of us who are in afiyah and removed from harm's way, that we don't have to make decisions, but we should be informed. The decision we do have to make, that we're obliged to make, is that we're obliged to have concern for the ummah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So if we mention people and we mention groups and we mention events in this talk and someone says, well, you're completely off base, you're wrong and I hate you, you can say you're off base and you're wrong, but the hate you part, leave it out. And all of us, let's agree as Muslims to have concern for one another, to have concern for our Muslim brothers and sisters, have concern for especially the innocents, especially those people who are not really in it for any sort of political glory, but they just want to pray their 5 daily prayers and raise their families. And this is not to say that it just limits our concern to Muslims. Our concern is also there for the non-Muslims who live under the umbrella of the sacred Sharia and who were protected by the umbrella of the sacred Sharia through centuries. That ironically, it's only when theocratic Sunni rule in these countries collapses that their communities basically are forced out. Whereas as long as there was somebody who ruled in the name of Allah and His Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and God-fearing judges and qudat who ruled according to the law of the Kitab and Sunnah, that those people were protected. But we have concern for those people as well because of the ahd and the covenant that their forefathers had with our forefathers, and that was given by Allah and His Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. For those of you who may not have caught it before, I do recommend that you watch the last live stream, the one that we posted from Sunday for Riyadh al-Salihin Dars. I spoke at some length about some personal feelings and personal reflections about the liberation of Halab from the Assadist forces that occupied it, I believe Friday night or so. And so the live stream was on Sunday, but the liberation was, I believe, Friday night or so. And in that Dars, later in that Dars actually, we mentioned the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that was narrated by Sayyidina Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu in the most emphatic of words, that whoever breaks the covenant of protection of even the least of the Muslims, even a slave of the Muslims, whoever breaks that covenant, that someone from the Muslims gives a non-Muslim a covenant of protection and passage through our land, and somebody then treacherously kills that person. The Prophet ﷺ, as was narrated by Sayyidina Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu, said that the curse upon that person is the curse of Allah and His angels and of all people. And so, we honor the covenant that their forefathers had with our forefathers, and if Allah Ta'ala should give in a particular land or in a particular place the honor of being ruled by our sacred Sharia once more, then those covenants are also to be respected and to be in place. So this is also another concern that we have concern for our Muslim brothers and sisters. We also have concern for those non-Muslims who live under covenant and protection in the Muslim lands, and we have concern for all people. We have concern for all people, but as a Mawlawī, as a person who represents the sacred law, and as a Muslim who is obliged to follow that sacred law, a person will prioritize their concerns based on what their responsibilities are, while having concern and a altruistic wish for goodness for everybody. But just like as a father, for example, I wish good for all kids, but I'm the one who's responsible for paying the rent for my own. Just like that, we have that concern. On top of that, Sham is a Mubarak place. It's a blessed land. The Prophet ﷺ, in a number of authentic ahadith, pegged the condition of the entire Ummah to the condition of the lands of Sham. And Rasulullah ﷺ made dua for the blessings of Allah Ta'ala to be in Sham. Sham being what I guess they refer to as the greater Levant. So what's now Syria, what's now Jordan, what's now Palestine, the occupied parts, and what's now Lebanon, and then parts of, I guess, what would be considered Turkey as well, Antakya and some parts of Turkey as well. That all of these were considered to be from the Bilad al-Sham. The Ajnad are the great cities of Sham, Hims and Qin-Nasrin, which was kind of an old city that was really close to what's now Halab and Damascus and Urdun and Palestine. The Ajnad are also, referred to in the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, that these places I consider them to be from the watan of the companions radiyallahu ta'ala anhum, in the sense that just like they made hijrah from Makkah Mukarramah to Medina Munawwara, to the point that now Rasulullah ﷺ, Medina is his watan, that he will be until the day of judgment. His place is in Medina, that he went to Makkah Mukarramah but he would always come back. Just like that, the companions went out in the path of Allah Ta'ala and they made these places their home. Egypt and Sham and Iraq and parts of Iran, parts of what's now Afghanistan, wherever the companions radiallahu anhum, their Mubarak footfalls went, and wherever they gave their lives in the path of Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala and they were buried, these places are all part of the homeland of Islam. And so they have a very important place in our hearts, and so we have concern for them. But more than land and more than buildings, and when I say buildings, I mean every single building, including Masjid al-Aqsa, including the Kaaba itself. The most revered and the most sacred thing in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the believer. And that's something that we should always remember. It's very interesting. There was a young child who happened to be Syrian. His father was a Syrian doctor. And so I asked, I said, "You're going to send your son to Maktab?" When I was Imam in Rockford. And he said, "Yeah," but I felt like it was kind of awkward, like it kind of caught him, and he's like, okay, fine now, this Mawlawī says that, asked me, so now I got to send my kid. So he said he sent his kid to Maktab the first day, and one of the things I mentioned is that the Kaaba, that the least of the believers is more holy and sacred in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala than the Kaaba itself. And so this little kid was like flabbergasted. He didn't believe it. So he went home and he asked his father, he said, "Is it true?" He goes, "Sheikh said that, even the least of the believers is more holy in the sight of Allah Ta'ala than the Kaaba itself. But I don't know, is it really true?" And so this doctor later told me the story that he came home and asked. And so he said, "Well, Sheikh said it, so it must be true." And so he told me afterward, he said that I was of two minds, should I even send him to the maktab or not? Because we'll teach him how to read, all that stuff was happening anyway. But he said just this one thing that he learned, he said that made me so happy, I thought that it's worth it for him to come to maktab just if he remembers this one thing. And that's what I remind myself and what I want everybody else to remember while going through all of these discussions. Because if you don't understand this part, the rest of it is not going to make sense. The analyses and things like that are not going to make sense. And so we talk about Syria, that it is an important place geostrategically. It is the route from Iraq to Palestine. It is the route from Turkey to Palestine and from Turkey to Hajj. All of the lands of the north, the caravans used to converge on Damascus and go together from there to Al-Quds al-Sharif on the way to Hajj. They would go as a caravan. The ulum, the ulama, it was the center of, from the time of the companions until very recently, it was the center of knowledge. The madaris of Sham were important madaris. The madaris in Damascus, Mahad Fath and Mahad Abu Nur, and the madaris of Halab, the Madrasa Khusrofiyya and Kiltawiyya and Sha'baniyya and the Zawaya of Sham. It was a place where the great mashayikh and awliya would stop and would take up residence. They say that Ibrahim ibn Adham is buried in Damascus, and a number of mashayikh from the silsila either passed through those places or would take residence there, and they're not really all that separate from one another. So Palestine and Syria, Jordan, they're not really all that separate from one another, except for because of adverse circumstances that we find ourselves in. And that those people are from the core some of the best of the Arabic-speaking Muslims of the world. And the armies that occupied Syria and that conquered Syria and settled Syria were the most reliable armies of the Khilafah and some of the most reliable defenders and supporters of Islam. They're the people who sacrificed again and again. They're the people who faced down the Crusaders. They're the people who faced down the Mongols along with the Egyptians. They're the people who really served Islam for a very long time. That all of these things are very important. This is the reason every Muslim should care about Sham. And obviously everyone's heart is connected to Masjid al-Aqsa, but and it is the third most sacred masjid, one of three most sacred masajid in Islam. But that being said, when it comes to the people, everybody who suffers, who says La ilaha illallah, to alleviate that suffering is a way of earning the ridha of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that exceeds optional prayers and optional fasting. And this is from somebody who encourages people to say a lot of prayers and a lot of fasting. So we have to understand what's going on. We have to go back. During the last part of the Ottoman Empire, Syria, Palestine, these were some of the most, and Iraq were some of the most well-integrated Arab-speaking provinces into the Ottoman state. Tunis, Algeria, they were a little bit further away and they were ruled with quite a bit greater autonomy. Yemen had quite a bit of autonomy compared to the central lands. The Arabian Peninsula had quite a bit of autonomy compared to the central lands. The revolt, what they call the Arab Revolt, the Sharif of Mecca. Sharif Hussein was already, had patronage under the Ottoman system. Whereas Sham, Syria, Palestine, and Iraq, they were much better integrated into the Ottoman system. And this is why when the Arab Revolt, what's called the Arab Revolt, was kind of jumped off and instigated by T.E. Lawrence and his collaborators from amongst the Muslims. The people of Sham were not really all that enthused about it. Many of them, probably more of them, sided with the Ottomans than sided with the revolt and the rebellion. But sadly, World War I, for reasons that we cannot get into because of fear of making this recording go on too long, it was a complete debacle and a complete disaster for the Ottoman state. And it caused all of these kind of new artificial borders to be put up and to break the bonds between brothers. So you have, for example, one tribe, some of their tribesmen now find themselves to be part of Egypt, some of them find themselves in what's Palestine, some of them find themselves in what's Jordan, what was originally Transjordan, and then later on becomes Jordan because Transjordan is on both sides of the Jordanian River. And because of their catastrophic losses against the Zionist occupiers, they actually will lose what's now the West Bank, which was supposed to be part of Transjordan, and they just dropped the name Trans from it. And Syria, you still have tribes that are scattered, the same tribe across sometimes multiple different countries, and Saudi Arabia, etc. And you have families that are cut off from one another, and you have these barriers and these borders that go up. And the idea with all of them is that the victorious powers of Europe want to dismember the Ottoman state and make sure that it never comes back together again. Make sure that the Muslims don't have any memory of their unity ever again, to give them these kind of fake identities in order to make sure that they never get back together again. In fact, what happened is that they sponsored a rebellion against the Ottoman state in the eastern part of the Arabian Peninsula and the western part of the Arabian Peninsula, both at the same time. And they figured at least one of them will be successful. Why not hedge our bets and have two candidates, and then if one of them is successful, the other one fails, then our plan is still on. Both of them were successful, sadly. So the rebellion in the west was the one instigated by Lawrence, that was participated in by the Sharif Hussein, and the one in the east was the one that the Al Saud instigated, along with a certain type of what I consider deviant theology that basically made takfir anybody who didn't accept a very narrow set of formulaic pronouncements that I don't really see as being justifiable from the texts of Islam. Although what happens is with every political movement, oftentimes they have to kind of chill out and become mild, because the amount of abrasion you need to bring a revolution and the amount of abrasion you need to sustain a state afterward are very different. And so they kind of turn down the dial on it a little bit. Not really all that much, not completely, but they turn down the dial a little bit. But they would make takfir, mass takfir on people, and basically their political adversaries, they would have their scholars brand them as non-Muslims and then fight them and kill them. And take their land and take their properties. So the British are like, well, who are we going to give the Arabian Peninsula to? You know, the ones on the east side, the ones on the west side. They ended up giving it to the Al Saud. Why? One is because they're far more violent and efficient at deploying violence. So politically, they're a more reliable ally. And this is not really slam on the Saudis in the sense that, I mean, I don't think it's a particularly good thing in this context, but it's not a slam on the Saudis. You have to understand, this is something very important to understand for this discussion and any other political discussion, which is that what defines a state is an entity or group that has a monopoly on violence in their own borders and has a franchise on violence from originating from their borders to outside their borders. So within their borders, this is the same reason that a cop can arrest you and you can't arrest a cop. The cop will not go to jail for beating you, but you'll go to jail for beating the cop even if you're innocent. Is because the state has a monopoly on violence and it has a franchise on perpetrating violence on outside groups. And so because of that, the Saudis were much better at perpetrating violence. And the second, perhaps even more important long-term strategic thinking on that behalf of the British was that the Sharif of Mecca in his rebellion was a little bit more of a threat to the British in as much as he was from the Ahlul Bayt of the Prophet ﷺ. So because of his noble lineage, there was a possibility that he would, even though he was the cause of the scattering of the unity of the Muslims, but there was a possibility that he would be able to bring it together again and it could coalesce around him. And he had aspirations for the Khilafah, whereas the Al Saud have had no aspirations for the Khilafah or to unite the Ummah, and they still don't have any aspirations for it. In fact, the clerical class is still happy to basically denounce everybody else outside of their very narrow band of people as being heretics or at best being deviants, and they have really no desire to politically unite the Ummah, but rather let people come to Hajj, and then when the Hajj season is over, encourage people to go home and not intervene in their affairs, and they not intervene in other people's affairs, other than in very particular ways that they find some kinds of utility in doing so, but not in any holistic sense. And so what happens is, as a concession, the British will give Jordan and Iraq to the family of the Sharif, and they'll give the Arabian Peninsula to the Al Saud. And like that, this is the genesis of Bahrain and Qatar and Oman and the United Arab Emirates. The ruling family of the Arab Emirates was at some point actually clients of the king of Oman. I mean, Oman, their kingdom is much older than the British, but at any rate, they've been allies of the British from the very beginning, and they definitely have sanction from them and some sort of protection. This entire system, you wonder where these countries come from. They're part of the dismemberment of the post-Ottoman Arab world. And so one, I guess, name to remember is the Sykes Picot Treaty. Sykes is a British diplomat, and Picot is a French diplomat. And when deciding how they're going to dismember the Ottoman states, they basically just sit down at a table with a map and draw an arbitrary line and say, this part the French will get, this part the British will get. So the British allot to their to their allies, local Arab allies that assisted them in the dismemberment of the Ottoman state, all of these different lands. On this other side, Syria and Lebanon, that was what the French received. And so that's why if you go to France, if you go to Syria, you'll find a lot more French influence in those places, whereas if you go to Jordan or if you go to Arabia or you go to Oman, it's more English dominated. Like what's the big fancy hotel in Damascus, right? It's the Shām Palace, but it's not Sham as in like the Muslim kingdom in Vietnam, but it's just, that's how you spell Sham in French, is with a C. So that's why. And so what happened is that Sykes Picot itself is a cause of trauma. For example, the separation of Lebanon from Syria. The French particularly separated Lebanon from Syria in order to use the Arab Christians as a kind of guard dog by which they can have a permanent presence and a permanent station and a kind of a thorn in the side of the majority Muslim populace in their part of the allotment from that treaty. And so because of demographic realities, the Muslim proportion of the Lebanese population is much higher now than when Lebanon was first created, but it's a completely unstable country. Why? Because they still weren't all Christians. There were Muslims there. There were Ithna Ashari Shia. There were different factions of Christians that also fight with one another, sectarian factions, who's Catholic, who's Orthodox, which Orthodox church did they belong to, who's Eastern Rite Christians, etc. And so like Lebanon is a complete mess. It's always kind of been a very unviable state. Why? Because it's as if you like make a country based on like the principles of DEI, wokeness, that okay, the prime minister always has to be of this religion, and the president always has to be of this religion, and the speaker has to be Shia, and this minister has to be Druze, and this minister has to be this or that. And so it's always this kind of groups of competing interests that don't have common interests that align, that make any sort of national agenda impossible, which is really ideal for a colonizer. That you want to have people there that are beholden to you, that need you for economic help, that need you for political and military backing, but that will occupy the land and be kind of like this wedge in the side of this majority Muslim populace. And it's for reasons similar to that, for example, the ruling party in Syria that receives franchise. You have to understand, after the destruction of the Ottoman state, many of these Arab states, they were new, so they had no tradition of statehood, and they're extremely weak, poor, and backwards. And so the rulers that didn't receive sanction from their colonial masters, they would just be put to the side and they would bring someone else forward. So it's not really in their interest to have any sort of strong local rulers that are keen to rule on behalf of their people and for the benefit of their people. Rather, they need people who are kind of like jail guards that will make sure that the locals don't rise up too much, and that when any resources need to be extracted or there's some sort of geostrategic interest that needs to be played out, that you need someone who's pliant, who will serve the colonial master. So this is why, one very important reality with regards to the current regime in Syria is that they belong to a minority sect. They say that they're Shia in a very taxonomic sense, but they don't follow the same religion as the Ithna Ashari Shia that live in Iran follow. Now, as a student of knowledge and as a person who teaches Aqidah professionally and has a significant amount of exposure to Ithna Ashari Shiite theology, which is the theology of the people of Iran, if their theology is not kufr, then I don't know what kufr is. Now, this doesn't mean that I'm saying every single person in Iran is a kafir. Well, first of all, they have a very significant, a very large and undercounted Sunni population. Iran, in my opinion, is neither majority Shia nor is it majority Persian-speaking. But the Persian-speaking Shiite minority kind of rules the country with a grasp, and they put out statistics that kind of serve their political goals. But you don't have to believe me on that, and I might be wrong, but this is a suspicion I have based on a number of issues that maybe we can talk about on another recording if you're really interested. The thing with Nusayri, Alawi Nusayri Shia clique that rules Syria, they're an extreme minority. They are basically a small tribal cult. So it's like a conflation between a religious and an ethnic minority, religious and ethnic identity. And if the Ithna Ashari Shia that are the majority of the people of Iran, or at least claim that they're the majority of the people of Iran and Iraq now, I believe if you look at their texts, they're not Muslims. But I don't make takfir of every single one of them. Why? Because not every one of them actually is educated enough in their religion to understand what the kind of strange, how deep the foxhole goes with their strange beliefs. That if you look in their books of tafsir, it's very clear that they believe that the Quran has been changed. It's very clear that they believe parts of the Quran has been lost. It's very clear that they believe that a person has to believe in 12 infallible imams after the Prophet ﷺ, and whoever doesn't believe in them is a kafir or a munafiq at best, that legally you can treat them as a Muslim, but in the hereafter they will be treated by God as a kafir, even though there's no explicit mention of the 12 infallible imams, neither in the Book of Allah nor in the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. There's like a lot of really problematic beliefs, but because a normal person doesn't think about these things, they just say, I'm a Muslim. Just saying you're Shia doesn't make you a kafir. Believing the beliefs of kufr makes you a kafir. And so, the population kind of like rides on both sides of this issue and kind of ice skates by under the principle that before making takfir, before anathematizing a person, the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, we say that you have to be 100% sure that this is not a misunderstanding before a formal authority issues the pronouncement of anathema against a person. But that doesn't mean that we should shy away from saying that their theology is highly problematic and violates the most basic and foundational tenets of creed in many places. If the Ithna Asharis are like that, then the Alawi Nusayris are ghulat. They're not even rawafid. They're not even close. They're not even close to being Muslims. They're non-Muslims of a type that there is no debate or discussion regarding their lack of Islam, because they don't believe that their cult members are obligated to follow the sacred Sharia. They don't believe that they're obligated to pray or fast or give zakat or follow any of the other tenets, hajj. They don't believe in the prohibition of alcohol. They don't believe in any of these things that the Muslims do. And rather they believe in a number of bizarre things, like that God was incarnated in the form of Ali, and just all of these kind of bizarre things that are very disconnected to Islam. And my theory with regards to like their religion, the religion of the Druze, and a number of these kind of small mountain cults that survive in these places in the backwoods of Iraq and the backwoods of Syria, the backwoods of Iran, is that these are old Zoroastrian cults that, in order to survive, just basically rename their gods and their religious figures. So this, instead of Ahura Mazda and the Amisha Spenta and this and that, they just name them Ali and Muḥammad and Hassan and Hussein. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his family are bura'a. They have nothing to do with these kind of bizarre ideas that they have about them. But this is very useful for the French to have a government in place ruling and dominating the populace, the Muslim populace of Syria, the very Ottoman and very aware of their Ottoman population, that's very Ottoman and very aware of their Ottoman heritage that was there in Syria, and very integrated into the Ottoman system. That you have this large tribe, ethno-cult tribe, that have not only religious but also family bonds with one another, that can be given money, arms, weapons, support in order to dominate the rest of the country. That's completely hapless in their face. This is something that it should be clear to people that this is in their favor and in their interests. And so what happens is that as time goes on, the establishment of Israel in the region by the British, the giving of British Mandate Palestine to the to the Zionists, it presents a threat to basically all of these Arab nations. These nations are nationalists. They're people who believe in the nation state. What is the nation state? The nation state is like this kind of chimeric freak of an idea. The idea that all people who have some sort of cultural affinity with one another deserve to have a country. So the Ottoman Empire was a multinational, multi-religious state. Now it's broken into these small places that are Egypt for Egyptians, Syria for Syrians. Obviously, it doesn't work out so well for every group, right? So the Kurds, for example, they don't get a state. They're a nation, but they don't get a state. Rather, they're distributed and broken up over Iran, over Iraq, over Syria, over Turkey, and this, it's a cause of a lot of political strife until this day for people. But what happens is that the Israelis, when they're kind of injected into the scene, they're antagonistic to all of their neighbors, and because of the superior, again, funding and armaments, weapons that they have, they're able to basically walk in and trample over native populations. And so they actually become the cause of some unity between all of these disparate groups, all of these disparate religious groups, political groups, nationalistic groups, all of these groups. They kind of have a couple of moments after World War II where they come together in order to defend themselves from Israel and to try to fight them. And by and large, the cohesion they have is very superficial, it's very flaky. You can read the history, it's very depressing, but they really don't make much headway. One can say at maximum they impede the expansion of the Israeli project so that it didn't get a chance to become the greater Israel that they wanted it to be, from the river to the sea, but the river being like the Tigris and the Euphrates and the Nile to the Mediterranean. Walillahi alhamdu, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be praised. But you have this kind of status quo, and after a while, after Anwar Sadat kind of folds, the Jordanians folded in front of Israel sooner than that, but they were a much smaller and a much weaker country. Egypt, when it folded, then all of the rest of the Arab states in the region, they kind of took a more Cold War approach toward the Zionist occupation. And that was the status quo until what? Until the first Gulf War and 9/11. The first Gulf War was an opportunity that was taken by neoconservatives. In hindsight, it was almost certainly driven by the Zionist lobby, because Iraq, from amongst these post-Ottoman states, was the most powerful and the most well-organized and the most orderly and the most disciplined. It was a nation in which you could get an education from kindergarten till PhD absolutely for free. It was free health care. There was free government services for everybody. It was a place of culture. My own Shaykh, rahimahullah tabarak wa ta'ala, was a master khattat. He was a katib, but master scribe. And so he actually would participate. There was like a world Arabic calligraphy competition that was hosted in Baghdad. A number of cultural things like this were hosted in Iraq. Iraq was just alive, and it hosted the most educated populace of any of the nationalities that made up the Arabs, with one exception, which is Palestinians. But because the Palestinians were a relatively smaller group, Iraq is a large country. It was basically Israel identified it as the prime threat against it after the Egyptian population was mollified, the Syrian population was mollified because of the dropping out of the Egyptians. And so, it was catastrophic. It was a catastrophic destruction. They did it on the Iraq War, followed it up by sanctions, and killed hundreds of thousands of people. It was really bad. All of this brought together a great amount of frustration in the Arab world against both Zionism and against its American backers. And so what happens is it coincides with another really interesting thing, which is what the Russians, they occupied Afghanistan. And so obviously Americans hate commies. I'm in that sense very American. I'm not a big fan of communism either, which will come up later. Because of that, our government actually sponsored Muslims from all over the Muslim world to come and get cheaply armed and fight against the Russians in order to sting them on our behalf without us having to commit any soldiers. And it was, by and large, a wildly successful operation. And those were wild days. I remember I was a kid in California, and people would literally come to the masjid and raise money for jihad in the masjid. And the government, the US government, was okay with it. They were happy. They encouraged it. Maybe it was them, in fact, that sent and brought people over and gave them visas to do this type of stuff. And so now you have this like a core of volunteers from all over the Muslim world, in particular from the Arab world, that have this idea in their mind that there should be some sort of Muslim unity and that we should travel from one country to another country in order to aid our Muslim brothers against a foreign oppressor. This was an idea that it's very well founded within Islam. A person who doesn't believe that should just open the Quran and read, and who doesn't believe that should just open the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ and read. Although I don't think it's all that violent of an ideology or concept. What did we say from before? Every nation, every state, I should say, not nation, every state is defined as a state in part by its monopoly on violence within its borders and its franchise on violence from within its borders to outside. And so if the Muslims have a state, then they also have access to this, just like America does, just like France does, just like Britain does, just like any other sovereign nation in the international scene has. And interestingly enough, like this whole idea of the theory of jihad. What is the theory of jihad within Islam? It's mentioned in our fiqh books, it's mentioned in our books of hadith, it's mentioned in the seerah, the maghazi literature, it's mentioned in the books of tasawwuf as well, because many of the mashayikh of the tariqah were themselves ghuzat. They were people who went out in jihad fi sabilillah. They're mujahidun from the very beginning of Islam in the classical period and all the way until this day. What is jihad but the expression of how Islam regulates, mandates, and gives protocol and rules to that license and franchise to violence that's monopolized by a state, which is not anything, is hardly anything unique to Islam and to Muslims. In fact, the unique thing is how much protocol and how much concern is given to the ethics of how this should be prosecuted in a way that's beneficial for people and not in a way that's just harmful and bloodshed. So coming back to the Afghan jihad, it stirred up this feeling and this awareness in the Ummah that was put to sleep by the crushing defeats that seemed to have rendered the body of the Ummah largely despondent and largely in despair, that they gave up hope that they'll ever be able to win any sort of military conflict against the colonizing power. So here's the Afghan people, a backwards country even for the purposes of poor Asian and African nations, and they hand a stinging defeat to the Soviet Union, which is one of the most sophisticated and one of the most potent military powers in the world. What happens is that the veterans and the graduates of this jihad, when the first Iraq war occurred, it really shook them hard to the core. They said, well, we thought we were all, about freedom and we were all about liberty and about releasing the Muslim world from this colonization, but what we realized is that you're just one colonizer who's playing us off against another one, and just like we fought the other colonizer, we're going to fight you as well. So this is basically the ideology that emerges around a number of jihadist groups, and I say again jihadist in the Western sense. Otherwise, Muslims are a jihadist group. Every nation has the violence, just not all of them have any rules about it. The Muslims, they have rules, and so they call it jihad. So one of those groups, and a very well-known group, is the group of Osama bin Laden, known as Al-Qaeda. There was a time in which American Muslims would look over their shoulders just from saying the word, because of how harshly proscribed they were. And I'm definitely, look, when I talk about all of these things, I'm not calling you to one group or calling you away from another group necessarily. First of all, necessarily, I'm not calling anyone within the borders of the United States to do anything evil, or from outside of it to harm the United States. But what I am doing is talking about what the real politics are, because our country does a lot of really wrong and messed up things, and they shouldn't do them. And when the blowback happens, they should understand why is it that people are fighting us, and why is it that they hate us. And it's not because of our freedoms, and it's not because of our way of life or because of jealousy. In fact, people love us as Americans because of the freedom and way of life that we've kind of sold this image to the world about, and we really did a lot to squander that soft power. So what happens is that you have Osama bin Laden and this cohort of the veterans of this Afghan jihad, and they're really dissatisfied with how badly America did over the Iraq and did over the Muslim world with regards to the Gulf War. Perhaps even more aggravating to him than the stinging defeat and massacre and sanctions against the people of Iraq itself was that he was incensed that America would keep an occupying army on the Arabian Peninsula, which was seen as a sacrilege and affront to Muslims everywhere, that's a sacred center of the Darul Islam, and there's literally a military occupation there, large military bases that were hosted first in Saudi Arabia and then later on in Qatar and in the UAE. That he considered that to be completely intolerable and unacceptable. On top of that, the fueling of the Zionist occupation of the Palestinians. Look, we now see all of these things on the internet because of social media. So we see how the Zionist jail keepers rape their prisoners. We see how the Zionist snipers take headshots at little children. We see how perverted they are, how they'll go into a house and they'll, threaten with rape women and children, and they'll take out the women's underwear and they'll like pose with it, and just all this kind of weird deviance and dementedness and perversion and sickness. We know about how they basically have have other nations, including America, politically in a vice grip. We know about this whole Epstein debacle where he had an island and he'd fly business leaders and political leaders and military and government officials to these places and film them in compromised positions and facilitate for them all sorts of otherwise legally proscribed debauchery in order to control them and manipulate them. And surprise, surprise, Donald Trump became president. And it seems like almost every one of his appointees are Israel firsters. Almost every single one of his appointees are Israel firsters. Why? All of this stuff was known before, but just regular people didn't have easy access to the information. So people like the Al-Qaeda and in general the intelligentsia in the Arab and Muslim world, because they were feeling the sting of this thing, they were aware of what's going on and how evil it is, how wrong it is, and so they wanted to stand up against it. And they chose certain ways to do it, some ways of which I don't agree with and I don't think the sacred law condones, but they considered that they had their backs against the wall. Again, you should understand where everyone is coming from. You don't have to agree with them. But even when you don't agree with them, you should understand where they're coming from. This is what they had in their mind that they were doing, so they made their stand. And that's what the official narrative is, first with the embassy bombing in Nairobi, and then afterward with the World Trade Center bombing in 9/11/2001 in New York. And what was the aftermath of all of that? They claim, Wallahu A'lam, the official story is what they claim, and then what afterward, the facts that come out later on. Maybe I'll be dead by the time these things become known, what the real story behind them was. But they claim that out of the hijackers, they're mostly Khalijis, they're mostly Saudi and Emirati and people that belong to the GCC orbit of states. And but what was the first country they went after? When war started, they went after Afghanistan, a country that ostensibly had no connection with 9/11. Why? the military-industrial complex wanted to spend its money, and they wanted to put up a flex, and the the government saw in what they thought would be an easy win, and like 20 something odd years later, now we realize we just ended up spending how many $1 trillion just replacing the Taliban with the Taliban. But it was a complete injustice, and it just made all of this worse. The second country they went after Afghanistan, which is just maybe like 2 years later, if not less than that, was Iraq. Now again, there was no Iraqi hijacker in 9/11, so ostensibly it has nothing to do with it. But still, there's a concern that the Iraqi state is intact. It was significantly degraded after the first Gulf War and almost a decade, if not more than a decade, of sanctions, but it's still intact. And so what happens is Netanyahu, the same Netanyahu who's causing all of this spilling of innocent blood in Gaza currently, he flew into the United States and testified in front of Congress that, if you get rid of the government in Iraq, it will make the entire Middle East a better place, it will this, it will that. What was he doing? He knew that the destruction of Iraq is not going to really change anything for the better, and it's not really going to do anything for the United States. But what it does is it takes Israel has a list of potential threats, and Iraq was on the top of the list. And so it crosses it out so that the Israelis lose a potential threat, and they don't have to do anything. They don't have to pay anything. They don't have to spend any lives or money or weapons or armaments in taking that enemy out. And by and large, the same corrupt mechanisms we talked about just a little bit ago, they convinced the U.S. government to do that. This is where another actor enters the scene. Now, for reasons that we'll skip over for right now, but should be examined, Iran had an antagonistic relationship with the United States. Around the turn of the century, they elected a democratically elected, legitimate president by the name of Muḥammad after being basically a monarchist nation. Because Standard Oil and other American economic interests did not align with his policies, Mossadegh was assassinated basically by the CIA. And in his place, they brought a very repressive monarchist regime, which is the regime of the Shah, the dynasty of the Shah, who was deposed by the so-called Islamic Revolution in the late 70s in Iran. And that Islamic revolution was a Shiite revolution. It was led by their cleric, who they refer to as Ayatollah Khomeini, and off the bat was very anti-Western, anti-imperialist, and anti-American. Why? Because the Shah was propped up by all of these kind of imperialist colonial powers, especially America. The Shah was a completely horrible person, and he was a pathetic person. He died of cancer. Nobody wanted to take his body. I think the Egyptians ended up taking him because his wife was an Egyptian or something like that. Died of cancer, basically stateless. But I remember seeing his autobiography sitting at someone's house and perusing through it, and he had already died a couple of years later, so this was a little bit later. He was writing, oh, look at these poor Afghans, so stupid of them to try to fight the Russians, they're so dumb, they're never going to win, they should have wised up and made peace with the Russians, and it wouldn't have caused them so much harm. Well, you're a coward, you died, mashallah. And the Afghans ended up winning against the Russians, amongst other people that they ended up winning against. But this is the type of person Shah was, and so when they threw him out, there was a high tide of colonial, anti-Western imperial feeling in Iran. And this caused a number of incidences to occur that put Iran at loggerheads with the United States. Fast forward to the Second Iraq War, which was egged on by the Israelis. The Israelis were the ones who pushed the Iraq War, but if there was any country that facilitated it, it was Iran. For those of you who were alive in those days, you'll know the sectarian Shiite partisans of Iran were some of the people who, after Netanyahu, were the most effective lobbyists in the United States that egged on the American military and egged on the American legislature to go to war. Obviously, the president had made up his mind from before, but he needed to get everyone else on board. So there was an individual by the name of Shalabi who flew to America and lied up and down. Lied in front of Congress, lied in front of every government and media platform that, oh, weapons of mass destruction and nuclear weapons and this and that and the other thing. He basically said anything he could in order to incite Iran to, in order to incite the United States to fight against Iraq and invade Iraq and completely destroy the system that was there. And so what ends up happening is the full might of the American occupation comes in, and who greets the American occupation? Iranian proxy Shiite groups. And they not only are the ones who facilitate the invasion, they're not only the ones who egg on the invasion, they're also provide like a class of contracted mercenaries, contracted basically people to take over the running and the administration of the day-to-day affairs of Iraq. And when they did so with a very, very, very poisonous sectarian flavor. Now, Iraq during the rule of Saddam was not, by any stretch of the imagination, a place that like celebrated like freedom of speech. Let's get that very clear and very straight. And I'm not here again to take one side or another in the sense of telling you that these people were on the haqq and those people. I don't have to explain anything anyone did and justify it. I'm just saying what happened, happened. Some things were good, some things were bad. They are what they are. If I have to choose, I know what I would choose. But I'm not, there to say that these people were 100% right, those people are 100% wrong. Not only am I not here to do it, neither should you be. You should just be here to understand. What happened is that these kind of pro-Iran proxy groups, they grew up so quickly, and they started committing purges against Sunni groups in the cities that you remember, for those of you who were around and listening to the news in those days, that the brunt of the military occupation came down on. Ramadi, Fallujah, Tikrit, Ba'quba, all of these places. These are the places where the Sunni populace was, and these are the places that resisted foreign occupation the hardest, and these are the places where the American invasion came down the hardest, and it was very strongly facilitated by these Iranian proxies, pro-Iranian proxies. And what I want people to understand is that the two catastrophic wars of the 2000s, Afghanistan and Iraq, both of them lie to the east and to the west of Iran. Iran closed their borders for both of them, so the refugees from the invasion of Afghanistan had nowhere to go except for where? Pakistan. Pakistan accepted them by the millions. I'm not here to say that Pakistan dealt with them perfectly, but they did let them in. By and large, they let them in, and they hosted them for quite some time. Are there incidences where Afghan refugees were ill-treated? Yes. Am I proud of it? Absolutely not. I'm generally not a big fan of Imran Khan. That's another podcast that I probably won't end up doing, just because Pakistanis get really, really upset about politics very quickly. But one thing I will say in his favor is that he did stick up for the Afghan refugees, and that's what we should do as Ummah for one another. However, still, people have to be fed, they have to be housed, they have to be clothed, economies have to run, and they don't run only on good feelings and wishing to help your brother. There were problems that occurred in that. And it harmed Pakistan economically, it harmed Pakistan in its national cohesion. It caused political problems for Pakistan, even though we consider, I'm not a Pakistani. My father was born in Pakistan. I never held Pakistani citizenship. But if I was a Pakistani, I would say we consider hosting our Afghan brothers an honor and a pride. But at the same time, you have to admit that it was something that was difficult for the country to bear. Iran didn't pick up any of that slack. Rather, they facilitated it because they saw the Taliban government in Afghanistan as a threat. And the same thing happened, if not worse, in Iraq, which is what? Which is that Iran went into overdrive in pushing their proxies to A, egg on America in the war, and then B, facilitate the war. And every single government that has sat in Baghdad since the Bremer executive directorship of the American military occupation has been gone have all been Iranian proxies. There are in fact factions of Iranian proxies that fight with one another, but they all have to respect Iran, and they respect Iran to some degree or another, although there is some wrangling between those groups. But by and large, they're all somewhat in the orbit of Iranian foreign policy. Those groups went nuts against the Sunnis in Iraq. You will see here, go and ask an Iraqi refugee, a Sunni Iraqi refugee in America, why would America even accept like Sunni Iraqi refugees, except for some of them have such traumatic stories of seeing their own family members tortured and killed in front of them. There were literally purges of entire families. There's so much blood that was spilt that what ends up happening is it starts this kind of sectarian war between Sunni and Shia. And the Sunni tribes in Iraq, they're tough people, and they're not going to take it easily, and they're not going to roll over. And sadly, what happened is using the foreign American occupation to kind of get one up on another group, it basically turned Iraq into the mess it is today, where it's basically a country that has no internal cohesion, and it's an extremely unsafe country, and it's a country that's divided against itself, with different areas, you know, kind of almost functioning semi-autonomously, whereas it was one federal system before that was economically much more prosperous, and that was politically much more cohesive. So why is this relevant? Because you're saying, okay, you're talking about all this stuff, you haven't spoken about Syria yet. The occupation of Iraq put into play a particular set of Iranian policies. One is using proxies and proxy militias that are armed and trained by Iran in order to basically enforce Iran's will on places that they want to extend their hegemony, extend their rule, extend their sphere of influence. It was in these years, I remember, I think it was 2004 or 5. I sat in a taxi in Al Ain in the United Arab Emirates. And, you know, the taxis are usually Pathans. Taxi drivers are usually Pathans. And so this taxi driver was no exception. He was a Pathan, but instead of having the standard like sibha, you know, hanging from the rear view mirror, or like a mushaf on the dashboard, this Pathan cab driver had this kind of like panja, the silver hand that's, you know, like kind of like this, and has the blue eye in the middle, which is whatever it is. Again, you can have a different podcast about it, but it's generally a Shiite emblem. And so I'm like, oh, what's that? I knew what it was, but I was just trying to see like what's going on here, because I'd never seen this before. He said, oh, you know, I got this from Iraq. I was like, we're speaking Urdu with one another, right? I go, when did you go to Iraq? Usually cab drivers are not people who are like big tourists, you know? They're not usually from the elite economic classes that can buy, you know, luxuries like plane tickets. And so I'm like, when did you go to Iraq? He said, I went to Iraq to fight. And I go, fight what? And so he explained to me that he's a very simple, like villager type guy, is that he was Shiite, and he said that he went there to fight for Iraqi freedom or whatever. And then he said that I was there for a while, and then at some point he said this, and I quote, Ayatollah Sistani told us all to go home. And for those of you who don't know, within the kind of system of like Shiite clergy, Ayatollah Sistani's sheikh was Ayatollah Khu'i, who was kind of like the nemesis of Khomeini. It's much more complicated than this, and so don't quote me on it, but for the purposes of our discussion, basically Khu'i was not happy with Khomeini's revolution. He says, you're going to get us all killed, because you know, we should just keep our heads down and like lay low and not come out like this. When the Mahdi comes, then we'll come out and like rule everything. Until then, we should just lay low, because this is going to be a problem for us. We're a small minority amongst a large group of other people. If we poke too much, it's gonna cause a bad reaction. Khomeini, on the other hand, believed, no, I'm basically the representative of the 12th infallible Imam who has been hiding in a cave since like the Abbasid Caliphate or whatever, and so I rule on his behalf according to our doctrine and our creed and our tenets, and he'll guide me to the right path, and I'm going to do all of this stuff. So basically, Sistani, who was the successor of Khou'i, the anti-Khomeinist group, he said, Ayatollah Sistani, I respected him, we got there, he was in Iraq, he told us all to go home, so we just left. And so I was astonished, I was amazed. I mean, this is a time when, if a person is in a masjid and someone said Al-Qaeda there like last month, your name is going to get on a list and you may not even get onto a plane. People would be like, J-word, because they were afraid to even say the word jihad. And it was just a really freakish and creepy time in the entire world system. Anyone who was a Muslim could be accused of being a terrorist, and that's it. This is a license to kill the person. Nobody's going to ask a question about it afterward. Whereas here, there's a guy who's like transnational militant, and he's driving around, and he's openly admitting that he, went here and there in order to fight their sectarian wars. And note, traveling to Afghanistan to fight the Russians, godless communists that took over a Muslim land and are trying to supplant Islam from it, is very different than settling a sectarian grudge. Saddam, for whatever you want to say about him, rahimahullah tabarak wa ta'ala, he was a Muslim, and he was, even if he's not going to get nominated for the Imam Ghazali Award for like Sufic excellence and creedal, intellectual, whatever. He was a Muslim. Nobody's going to say that he openly was an enemy of Islam. He didn't seem to champion any sectarian group. He was more about telling everybody, look, you're a Muslim, you're Iraqi, pray 5 times a day, shut up and go to work. Don't get into this. Maybe because he knew what was going to happen, which is the complete sectarian Pandora's box that opened up after his system that he put in place was scrapped. Whatever it is, whatever it isn't, he basically went from Pakistan to Afghanistan to Iran to Iraq to fight another set of Muslims. And then he went back and got off scot-free. No one did anything. And Pakistan, again, was a very, hand-in-glove participant in the war on terror. And American drones used to kill Pakistani villagers with impunity on a regular basis for a very long time. The blowback of which is still there in Pakistan. The most violent factions of the Taliban are the ones that are in Pakistan. They claim the name of Taliban, and the Taliban in Afghanistan, I guess, basically haven't distanced themselves from them, but they really are a separate group. And all of it emerges from those that tribal belt where the villages, and, janazas and madaris and kids learning Quran and all this. These people were just bombed with impunity during the war on terror, and nobody stuck up for them. And basically, in exchange for being able to bomb them with impunity, the military dictatorship under General Pervez Musharraf was given all sorts of concessions from the United States, and it's just really a bad time. But this guy is able to somehow, at the behest and at the expense of Iran, travel from one place to another in order to go fight. Syria. You've probably heard the name of Abu Muḥammad al-Jawlānī. Jawlan is a nisbah toward the Golan Heights, which is an occupied part of Syria that the Zionists have occupied since, I believe, the 67 war, the Six-Day War in 1967. In which the Muslims lost the Masjid al-Aqsa completely to the Zionist occupier and Moshe Dayan, the Dajjal before the Dajjal, the one-eyed Israeli general, and his soldiers danced on the Haram Sharif, wal-iyadu billah, and it's been polluted by their disrespectful presence ever since then. And I find it very strange that they consider that place to be a sacred place in the holiest of holies, but the way they behave over there is completely obnoxious. We would never behave like that in our masajid, wal-iyadu billah. But he's displaced. His father is an Arab nationalist. He's basically a Nasserist. And they have to, they moved to Damascus. Why? Because their ancestral lands in the Golan Heights are dispossessed. I think his name is Ahmad Shar, Abu Muḥammad Jawlānī, his name is Ahmad Shar, and he grows up in I don't want to say irreligious household in the sense that they weren't Muslims, but they're not like, it's not a family of scholars or a family of people who are, dress ostensibly Muslim, or are people who are Quran memorizers, or people who regularly go to zikr or whatever. And so what happens is he was born in 1982, so he's a year younger than I am. So that means that he was 20 or 19 at the time that the second Iraq war happened. It said that he tried it, and I want to credit one of my students who is from, I think, northern Lebanon, and has family in Syria as well, who did this research for me. He sent me some materials, but much of it, the interviews quickly degrade into like local dialect, so it's a little bit harder for me to understand, but it's really interesting interviews, really interesting resources. But basically, the summary that he provided for me was that this Ahmad Shar, he traveled to Iraq when the invasion was impending, and he was frustrated that they were not ready to receive help over there, because he had this idea in him that I'm already a refugee, we already lost our homeland to the Zionists, and we're Arabs, we're Muslims, we should stick up for one another. So here is this kind of like outside force that's gonna come, like non-Muslim, non-Arab force that's gonna come and try to trash Iraq, and so we should go do something. And then afterward, a couple of years later, after the occupation is definitely there and much more cemented, he goes back to fight in Iraq again, and this time he finds a place, he finds a group of people that he can fit in with, but he's quickly captured by the American forces and he's put in prison. He convinces them that he's an Iraqi, so they don't sequester him with the foreign fighters. And they actually give him a tour. He goes from prison to prison throughout all of the American prison facilities in Iraq. And basically the US taxpayer gave him this like Al-Qaeda networking whirlwind tour. And so he meets all these different commanders, he meets all these different foreign fighters that come from all over the world, he meets all of the different people in Iraq, he meets all of the command structure of Al-Qaeda, who he's kind of fallen in with. One of the things in the interview they mentioned is that between the two trips to Iraq that he took, he starts to dress and act more like Osama bin Laden. Why? Because like Osama bin Laden, who was from a very wealthy family, he is a person who thinks about the problems of his people and wants to do something about it. And so he joins Al-Qaeda. Now to an American, they think, oh, join Al-Qaeda, he's a terrorist, right? And sure, Al-Qaeda does some things that are very terroristy, in the sense that things that even the sacred law of Islam may not be, may not condone or sanction or look well on. But those people were doing what they did what they thought was best. They may have been wrong at times, but their goal is not to like kill innocent people. Their goal is what? Is to somehow or another deter this threat from their homeland, from their own countries, from the Arabs in general, and from the Muslims in general, and from the Muslim Ummah in general. And so what happens is that when he gets out of detention in Iraq, he asked the Al-Qaeda command structure for permission to have 100 fighters go with him to Syria, so they can overthrow the godless secular Alawī Nusayri Syrian state. And they say, you can have 6. And so he goes with his 6 guys back, and he starts his project over there in Syria. At the same time, you have Al-Qaeda, and you have something called then Daesh, ISIS, right? Daesh is an acronym, which is really weird. Having acronyms like that is something that's not really all that Arabic of a thing to do, but it's very common in Hebrew. Daesh is what? الدولة الإسلامية في العراق والشام. دولة إسلامية دال ألف في العراق in عين and then Sham, Daesh. And so just, it turns into this acronym, which is like in English what they say ISIS, ISIL, like the Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant, or the Iraq and Syria, right? So both of them get used at some time. I think ISIS becomes a little bit more commonly used than later on. So what happens is he already started this project, but ISIS makes it to Syria as well. What is ISIS? ISIS is basically a group of super disgruntled Iraqis who see these sectarian purges, see people get picked up off the street, tortured to death, see all of these like really, really grotesque and violent sectarian flexes that the Shiite partisans in Iraq are doing on the Sunnis in order to completely dominate them and efface them. And you know, if there's anything I know about Arabs, it's that you know, escalation is, you know, violence and threats is going to lead to escalation. It's not going to lead to submission. I remember meeting in Seattle one time a Iraq veteran, and he told me about his experiences. And I said, look, see this mosque? There's like, I can point to 13 Iraqis that pray here every day. If you just talked to all 13 of them, you would have known exactly how the Iraq war would have turned out. Because they're relatively hot-headed people who don't really compromise on things all that easily, especially if you try to force them to. And so what ends up happening is that they, which is neither here nor there, just an anecdotal experience, but one that led me to believe that this type of behavior is not going to result in dominating the Sunni population. It's just going to antagonize them and cause them to fight back and lash out, and that's exactly what they did. So for those of you who remember, there was an Iraqi dissident they referred to as the Red Devil. You remember him? So his name is Izzat al-Duri. I think he's like some kind of a relative of Saddam. And he, rahimahullah ta'ala, and he had red hair, so they called him the Red Devil, red, big furrowed red mustache, right? And so, you know, the deck of cards, like there was a time that they, all the like the most wanted Iraqi, like previous regime members that the occupation wanted to capture, so they would give out playing cards. So there's a deck of cards, 52 most wanted people, and it had pictures of them on them. He was one of the higher cards in the deck. So Izzat al-Duri, they never caught him. He was part of that group. There are a number of Sunnis basically got together and they're like, look, Sunnis culturally, as far as teaching Aqidah, that's a whole separate discussion. He was part of that group, and he, along with others who were part of the old, very repressive and very violent regime, which was at least on paper secular, although Saddam was a man who still believed in Islam and still practiced Islam, but he didn't make any pretense to the caliphate or to any like sort of old classical conception of Shara'i rule, to my knowledge. And if there are any Iraqis you want to weigh in on it, please feel free to like put a comment about that. But to my knowledge, I don't think he was trying to do any of that. But he's still a Muslim. So they got together and they're like, look, we got to fight fire with fire. These people are being extremely violent and extremely crazy, and they're trying to basically scare us with these tactics of basically terror and like threats and bloodletting. So we're going to fight against them. And we're going to basically overwhelm them and overawe them the same way that they did to us. Which I think is personally, it's really horrible. But at the same time, again, you don't have to agree with what people do, but you should understand why they chose to do those things, where they're coming from. That they're like, look, we're gonna get like wiped off the map. We're gonna go extinct until or unless we do this. And this is probably something similar to the way that the sectarian mobs fought one another during the partition of Pakistan and India. So they basically started to dish it out back in return to the Shiite militias, like they were taking it at a time that they were able to, do so at some arm's length from the American military occupation. So Izzat al-Duri was, a part of the taking over Mosul, which was the center of Daesh of ISIS in Iraq. So at any rate, as the name implies, this project was simultaneously happening in Iraq, and it was simultaneously happening in Syria. The markaz, their center in Syria, was a city called Raqqa. And their markaz in Iraq was Mosul, which is a major and important center in the north, from old times. Getting back to Jawlānī, Jawlānī now is in another problem, which is what? He's trying to carry the flag for the Al-Qaeda franchise in Syria, and now ISIS is operating in Syria as well, and ISIS tells him, hey, look, you gotta fold and you gotta join us. Why? Because we're the legitimate authority here. He's like, no, I was here first, and you guys don't even recognize Al-Qaeda. Why? Because Al-Qaeda is too soft for you. I mean, Daesh are really, they're just crazy people. I mean, there's, you know, if Al-Qaeda, I can say they committed excesses that I don't agree with, but I kind of understand where they're coming from. I think Daesh are completely psychopaths, and they're not the same. And this is one of the stupid things, one of the many stupid things about the current analyses that are there floating around in the media, is that they equate the two of them with one another. Whereas the ISIS basically also would fight against Al-Qaeda for being apostates or whatever. They were basically there to kill everybody who didn't agree with them, and they didn't know what they represented in the first place. It was very amorphous and very liquid. And so what happens is that Jawlānī now is in command of the part of Al-Qaeda in Syria that is not affiliated with ISIS, and they're fighting with one another. At some point or another, the Syrian revolution, it gets to a critical mass, and they're about to take out the entire Hafiz Assad regime. It seemed like a foregone conclusion. They received aid, or at least some sort of low-level support from Egypt, which was ruled by President Morsi, the first and, to my knowledge, only democratically elected leader of Egypt. And things were good for the Palestinians as well, because on the Gaza side they had Morsi to support them, and on the Syrian side, now they have some camaraderie with the Muslims of Syria, who are about to kind of overthrow all of the fasad and all of the mischief of the Sykes-Picot Treaty, at least within their lands. What ends up happening, though, is Iran, in particular under a commander of theirs, General Qasem Soleimani, who, you know, I just think is a very evil person. I just really have nothing good to say about him. In fact, this is one of the things I'll say. I think that Donald Trump, one of the few things I can point to from his administration that I thought actually he did that was good, was assassinating him. And he probably did it for the wrong reasons. He probably just did it because the Israelis wanted him to. The Israelis, their policy was what? These are potential threats. They're on a list for like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So whoever's the most powerful of them, just cross them off the list, get America to do your dirty work for you, and then we don't have to deal with anyone. So they don't care. I mean, Israelis don't care about religion. They don't care. I mean, most of them are atheists in the first place. They don't care what the difference between Shia and Sunni is. It could be the Cookie Monster and like the Count from Sesame Street. If they cause a threat, you know, they're going to put them on the list to kill them. So whatever reason he did it for, but he assassinated Qasem Soleimani when he was in Iraq. Qasem Soleimani basically architected an agreement that the Syrian people were not only able to, because Jawlānī's group is only one of many groups in Syria that are working for the people in order to overthrow this secular and repressive socialist, basically communist regime from Syria. They were so successful that they were basically about to win when Qasem Soleimani architected and brokered a deal on behalf of Iran and its proxies in Syria, which now include these mercenaries from Pakistan, probably from India as well, these Shiite mercenaries from Afghanistan, Shiite mercenaries from Iran, from other places, poor countries, just pay them money to come and fight and just be kind of cannon fodder in these wars. They were still overwhelmed by the Syrian people. So he architected bringing Russia into the war. Russia was hitherto had a very mild interest in who won the war, at most. Maybe didn't care at all. And so he convinced them, look, we'll do all the fighting on the ground. We just need aerial support and some logistical support. And in return, we will put everything into your sphere of influence. Because Putin at this point is sick of the West and its hypocrisy with his country, with Russia. And so what he wants to do is make an oppositional axis of countries that economically can trade with one another without the threats of American sanctions against them, and without the levers of power that kind of impinge on the sovereignty of every country under the kind of the post-World War II global order. They convince him that, like, you know, that this is going to be a very important and vital part of that piece of that puzzle. And so the Russians come into the war, and with their superior weapons, technology, and merciless aerial bombardment, absolutely gut Syria. And part of the thing the Russians brought into the war was just completely destroying civilian populaces that were not pro-Assad. Anywhere where there is any civilian populace, which is almost always Sunni Muslims, just neighborhood after neighborhood, bombing residential buildings, to the point where, you know, the pictures from Halab, from Aleppo, and the pictures from Gaza, they're completely indistinguishable from one another. The same camera drone that's sent into the neighborhood that will show you flat after flat after flat of destroyed buildings, before and after pictures that are completely unrecognizable from one another, that we're seeing in Gaza right now. All of these shayateen, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala burn them in this world and in the hereafter for what they did to innocent people. They basically said, okay, if you guys don't want to live under our rule and our repression and our oppression, then you're not going to live at all. They just destroyed it. This is around 2016 or earlier. If you'll remember back then, that was when all of these waves of refugees left Syria. The waves of refugees started leaving like 2012, 2013, 2014, but 2016 is, when you see, like, the iconic pictures of like children floating up onto the beach, because their boats that they're trying to go to into Europe capsize. Turkey is overwhelmed with refugees, and they at some point just have to open up their the routes for the refugees to go into Europe. It's interesting, like in the onerous terms against the Ottoman Empire after World War I, like all the little islands, almost all the little islands that are literally just like swimming distance from the Anatolian coast, they gave them to Greece, right? So Lesbos, it's a place that had masajid in it. It was the home of the legendary Muslim naval commander Barbarossa Khizr Bek. It's just like literally right off like a good swimmer could probably swim there. You could kayak there or like paddle boat there. Now it backfired, because since it's EU territory, so all these refugees can kind of get onto EU territory relatively easily through these channels. So they're flooding into Europe. Why? Because Iran brought Russia into a war that they had nothing to do with. And what is it? Iran basically bringing a kafir power in to fight and kill Muslims by the tens of thousands, and displace them by the millions. To the point where, the Syrian refugees overwhelm countries as far afield as France, and as far afield as England and the UK and Eastern Europe and Germany and all of these places. They just completely overwhelm all of these countries. They take back routes, walking through the forest, etc., etc. And so, what is this? This comes back to meet with what? With Jawlānī, who is fighting right now with Al-Qaeda's affiliate in Syria, and he has to fight against Daesh because they're crazy, and he also is still fighting the Nizam. He's still fighting against the government in Syria. And these two are far from the only groups that are fighting against the government. The Kurds have their own militias that are fighting against the government in Syria. There's the Free Syrian Army, that is, a faction of other scholars and other Syrian civil society members that fought against the Assadist government. And there are a number of ulama that support this fight as well. One of the really weird things that gets brought up is that, oh look, the Syrians are rebelling against their leaders. This is wrong. The prohibition in Islam of rebelling against your leaders only applies to Muslims. And the Syrian government was basically all run by Alawis. There is a discussion about a rapprochement that happened by a certain set of Syrian scholars with Hafiz al-Assad, Bashar's father, under the leadership of one Sheikh Kuftaro, who was a Naqshbandi Sheikh, that the exchange that they had was, look, at least nominally act like a Sunni, say that you're a Muslim, show up for prayers every now and again, and show the symbols and the emblems of Islam, so that we can have a face to show the people to say that you're a Muslim. And in exchange, we'll basically quell and quash any sort of talk of dissent, because neither are we going to overthrow you. There's a violent history of that. The people of Hama were killed by the tens of thousands, and it didn't bring any result. They were not able to dislodge the Nusayri well-armed and well-funded minority. And but at the same time, the Sunnis didn't get, they were still dissatisfied that they're living under occupation. So Hafiz Assad kept that bargain until he died. Bashar inherited that bargain from his father and kept it for a couple of years, and they thought he was going to liberalize Syria after his father had died. But Iran again sent its proxies and its diplomats into Syria and convinced him not to do that. That you should revert out of this agreement, that you should, because Nusayris, because you revere Ali as well, you should become a Shia, and you should revert out of this agreement and stop giving official sanction to the Sha'air of Deen as is understood by the Muslims of Syria. And instead, we'll back you. We'll be your, we'll be like the crutch you can lean on, because we're going to be much more helpful to you, and we're going to be much more loyal to you. And so he basically turned his back on that agreement. And at any rate, all of his Alawi Nusayri crew, still aren't Muslims to this day. If you don't believe me, go see the pictures of and the videos of them capturing their the rebel soldiers and the way they tortured them, the type of mockery and the type of blasphemy against Allah Ta'ala and His Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and the type of blasphemy toward the masahif and the sacred objects of Islam that they did. It's very clear that they're not Muslims at all, and that they have no even respect for Islam as a deen. And so what happens is that all these different segments of society come together in order to fight. Now that the rebels, their back is to the wall, they try to coalesce a little bit more. So one of the problems with Al-Qaeda in Syria is what Al-Qaeda also has a brand issue of being terrorist, and they've done things in the past that are distasteful to Muslims and that are not sanctioned by the sacred law. Perhaps they believe that they were doing whatever they were doing out of necessity or whatever in front of an enemy that's merciless. Whatever it is, it isn't. There was an understanding that they needed to be rebranded. So they repudiated their connection with Al-Qaeda as a worldwide organization, and they renamed their group Jabhatun Nusra, the Nusra front, the front of victory, to give a rough translation, although there may be a better one than that. And so the Jabhatun Nusra then later on also will, as the Russian air superiority and Russian weapons and Russian military advisors will basically take back most of the country and push even Halab out of the hands of the rebels, which happened in 2016. Which we talked about. I talked about at some length in the last live stream last Sunday, so you can listen to it over there if you want to. All these different rebel groups kind of had to coalesce, and they put their differences aside with one another, and they made this organization. The Kurds were separate from it, but they made an organization that got the name of what they call now HTS in the news, the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, the movement for the liberation of Syria. And it has all sorts of groups in it. This is one of the things I want to say very clearly. It has in it Salafi groups, it has in it Sufi groups and Ash'ari groups. This whole thing, I made the last video on in Riyadh Salihin. Someone brought to my attention that somebody said, oh, you shouldn't say anything positive about them because Jawlānī is a Wahhabi. Jawlānī is a Salafi, he's a Wahhabi, he's not from the Ahl Sunnah. I say no. First of all, there are very few actual like Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab Wahhabis left. Even those people who identify as Wahhabis have interpreted the original teachings in a way that kind of like breaks its legs and makes it sit down instead of stand up for much of the violent tendencies that it had from before. I still disagree with many of its tenets, but it's not the same as you know what happened in the Arabian Peninsula during the days of rebellion against the Ottoman state. The second thing is, as far as I can tell, the man is not really a creedal ideologue. If he is a Salafi or Wahhabi or Athari or Mujassim or whatever things you want to say, he is so by circumstance rather than by conviction. I mean, he was born and raised in a household with a father who's a Nasserist. So, you know, I don't think it's like any baggage that he carries with him. Allahu alam. Allah knows best. I don't know the man very well, and this is conjecture from a distance, and I way might be wrong about it. But more than that, look, when it comes to sectarian issues, you have to come to a point. Look, are these people kafirs or not? If you cannot say that they're kafirs, which generally you cannot in all of these groups, you know, as much as I dislike the official theology of the Saudi state and of the enfranchised ulama of Saudi Arabia and of their the people who follow that ideology in the United States from my neighbors, I won't refuse to say salam to them, and I won't say that they're kafirs until unless someone does or says something completely outrageous or wild in a way that they don't say or do even over there, much less over here. So if it's a struggle between a government which is not Muslim and that killed hundreds of thousands of people and displaced millions of people, so what if Jawlānī is a Salafi? I don't care. I'm not sending people to learn Aqeedah from him. If he's a Muslim, he's a Muslim. But further, you know, it's, you know, this thing like, you know, that you have this tanky propaganda. I'm going to talk about this word tanky just in a minute. But you have this tanky propaganda that somehow or another, oh look, it's basically we're funding Al-Qaeda in Syria. We're funding Al-Qaeda and we're funding ISIS in Syria. First of all, Al-Qaeda and ISIS don't even get along with one another. They fight one another. This laziness of like just lumping everyone in together. I mean, one of the reasons the Taliban was actually had a rapprochement with the United States Army was because ISIS popped its head up in Afghanistan. They had the ISIS-K group over there, not Kellogg's cereal, but ISIS Khorasan. Those are really tough people to fight. The United States military did not want to fight them. You know who fought them? The Taliban fought them. Why? Because these are sick people. The ire and spite that they bring down always hits the Muslims. Hits the Muslims more than it hits anybody else. And to fight them is an act of piety for every Muslim. And I say this, whoever fights Dawa'ish, wherever you find them, may Allah Ta'ala aid you in your struggle, and don't ever have this idea, I'm killing another Muslim. Rather, this is the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, his command for who Sayyidina Umar, Sayyidina Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhuma, with regards to the Khawarij, that fight them wherever you see them, because they're the worst of sharrul khalaiq tahta adim as-sama. They're the worst of the creation under the cover of the heavens. And even though our fuqaha didn't say that they're kafirs, legally they're not kafirs, but the hadith seems to indicate a type of nifaq that people like this have, that spill the blood of other Muslims without thinking about it, to spill the blood of people and resort to violence despite their beards or their turbans or however they may dress or however they may look. That's a really screwed up reality, right? Al-Qaeda is problematic, but they're not that. And now you have the Jabhat al-Nusra that even distances itself from Al-Qaeda. So sure, they might be Salafis, but how virulent of a Salafi are they? The Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, it was a conglomeration of like 12, 13, like just a number of groups. Some of them are Sufi and some of them are Ash'ari, some of them are Salafi. And so this idea that somehow the traditional Syrian ulama don't back the revolution. Sheikh Bouti didn't back the revolution, and some of the people from that original group under Sheikh Khuftar rahimahullah tabarak wa ta'ala, that had this dream inside of their hearts that they could still hold on to the previous agreement that the ulama had with Hafiz Asad, Bashar's father, that Bashar basically threw away, and that Sheikh Bhuti thought that he could salvage, but he couldn't. Whoever killed him, Allah knows best who killed him. Was it the Daesh and these types of people who killed him, or was it the government that killed him? Because if he turned, it would have caused no doubt in people's minds that the Syrian government has to be overthrown. At least to this day, there are people, I know there are scholars online who are too intelligent to say the things that they say, but just because of their inability to separate themselves from Sheikh Bhuti, because of their emotional attachment with him, to be able to separate themselves from him because he tried to salvage that agreement, they speak ill of the rebellion. But he's hardly like a Nabi, is he? Rahimahullah ta'ala. I don't speak ill about him. I disagree with him on this issue. Who cares what my position is? Someone say you're a Paki sitting in Chicago. I say I'm not even a Paki, and I'm not even really in Chicago. So even that even that you gave me more than I deserve. But forget about Hamza. Look at the other mashayikh in Syria. Look at Sheikh Sabuni rahimahullah tabarak wa ta'ala. Look at Sheikh Osama Rifa'i, who is not like a political guy in the first place, just Shafi person, Sheikh who is a great alim, a great scholar who is concerned primarily with ilm. Look at Sheikh Yaqubi. Look at Sheikh Quraym Rajih. Look at all of these other mashayikh who were forced out of the country. Look at all of these other mashayikh, whether they be Salafi or whether they be Sufi, whether they be sheikhs of tariqah and scholars who taught the Ash'ari creed, who themselves with their murids, with their disciples and with their with their students stood against the government in order to defend the people from their tortures, for their prisons, from their iniquities. And tell me, is it that Sheikh Bhuti is infallible imam of your group? That he's some kind of Nabi or something tantamount to a Nabi, that he couldn't have been wrong about this, that he had a desire to do something, but maybe he was wrong, or maybe he wanted something to happen and Allah Ta'ala wrote in his qadar it wasn't going to come to pass? And that perhaps you should not cling so blindly to this ideology and this political tack, because it's obviously not worked and it's not working? Or is it that he was right and everybody else is wrong? And somehow or another there's a hikmah in all of these Iranian proxies from the tribal areas in Pakistan and Afghanistan, from India, from Iran, from all of these different places that killed, that spilled blood, that desecrated holy places, that desecrated the grave of Sayyidina Umar bin Abdul Aziz, that desecrated the grave of Sayyidina Khalid bin Walid in Hims, that desecrated the resting places of the mashayikh, that desecrated the masajid, the Jami' Ummawiyah in Halab, that desecrated and destroyed the madaris, that desecrated and destroyed the zawaya, that the people were even willing to live under Bashar knowing he was a Nusayri as long as he left them alone, but they wouldn't even do that anymore. They took their economy away from them, they took their houses away from them, they took their deen away from them, they took everything away from them, to the point where even if a person is being willfully ignorant, they still can't look the other way. This is unfair. And to act like somehow or another this is just some sort of Wahhabis who came and caused trouble in order to destabilize a Muslim country, this is ridiculous. Nobody would be patient with that level of torture, and nobody can be patient with that level of torture except for people who are extremely rich and extremely well connected and have extreme amount of means. Common people will they'll either have to leave Islam or they'll die when dealing with this type of nonsense. And even those who wanted to deal with it and be patient with it, the level of violence that was inflicted on the Syrian people, barrel bombing, the whole phenomenon of barrel bombing. They ran out of explosives, so they would fill barrels with explosives and just throw them off the sides, not even real bombs, just throw them onto residential buildings to burn them down and run people out of town. You're just ridiculous if you think that you have to be a Wahhabi to not be able to live with that. No one can live with that, no one can tolerate it, even if they wanted to. And so what ends up happening is that this Tahrir al-Sham, the movement for the liberation of Sham, to say that they're all ISIS is just dumb because ISIS never even joined them. To say that they're Al-Qaeda is dumb because literally Jabhat al-Nusra like publicly repudiated their ties with Al-Qaeda because they considered the project of liberating their own homeland to be a priority over whatever Al-Qaeda agenda they had for like world whatever. And the fact that they're even working with Asha'ira and Sufis means that what? They have their own sectarian views, but they're not to the point that they make takfir of other people. They're not takfiris. And by and large, what I've heard from present company included and from other Halabis who have spoken to their people back home as well as seen on the internet is that these kind of videos of, oh look, they came in and decapitated people, these are all old videos, they're not of the same people, it's not the same time, it's not the same place. They're just fake videos that people are putting out there, information war type videos. Rather, what I see, someone put up a video of like someone taking down a Christmas tree in the middle of the street that had no lights on it or whatever. Oh, look, genocide against the Christians, cultural genocide. Christmas trees are not really part of Eastern Christianity as far as I can tell, or Christianity at all, but definitely not Eastern Christianity. And B, it turns out that was also not. That was like from Iraq or something like that. That wasn't even from Halab in these last couple of days. But what is authentic is that the electricity is no longer being monopolized by the military and by the Russian bases. So now Halab has electricity for most of the day, if not all of the day, whereas the regime only gave them electricity for 2 hours a day. That services are back up. That the bakeries of Idlib was basically the HTS, the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham and Jabhat al-Nusra and all these different groups. They're basically driven out, and that was their kind of last part of Syria that they had. And even the entire Idlib province wasn't under their control, but all these different groups lived together there. And the bakeries of Idlib actually were working overtime so that the armies could come with bread, so that people of Halab had something to eat, because while the siege is going on, they're not going to be able to feed their own populace. And what we see is mass happening in the Christian churches, and the Christians are saying, they promised us they're not going to harm us, and they haven't done so yet. Does this mean tomorrow Sufi and Salafi are not going to fight with each other and something bad is not going to happen to the Christians and something this not? By tomorrow, nobody knows what's going to happen. So I would be lying to you if I told you that this is all going to be rainbows and unicorns. But so far so good, according to all of the people, the Syrians I know that called their own families and asked, and according to all the things that I've seen that are credible on social media. And we pray that it continue that way. As for Jawlānī, one of the reasons he is the commander of this particular offensive, which, it wasn't, people say, oh, look, they did it to backstab the Lebanese. It was under plan, it was being planned for quite some time. And the thing that put it into motion was the Russian military being tied down in Ukraine. As a Muslim who's seen the Muslim world being victimized serially for as long as I've been alive, and reading history that it's been going on for like a century and a half from before that. I say if the Russians and the Ukrainians are fighting, I wish they didn't fight. But if they're fighting, let them fight one another so that our people can have rest and peace. Because Afghanistan once, then Iraq once, then Afghanistan a second time, then Iraq a second time, Palestine, all of these just horrors that are being visited on the Muslim world time and time again. The same cast of characters, Western Europe, Russia, Soviet Union, or whatever iteration it has, the United States, they're visiting it on all these poor, hapless countries. I wish they didn't fight, but if they're going to fight, it's better that they fight one another and give the poor people a rest from depleted uranium shells and white phosphorus and all these other horrors. So when Russian military was tied down in Ukraine, they probably started planning all of this since then. But what happened was the Israeli military was tied down in Gaza, and the Lebanese Hezbollah faction, which is mostly in the south of the country, saw an opportunity to flex and to push its gains forward while the Israeli military was distracted, because they had the guarantee of Iran behind them. And they overplayed their hand, and Iran freaked out. and they said let's negotiate behind the scenes. This is my assumption. I don't have any proof for this, but this is what seems to make most sense to me. That they freaked out, that they made some performative gestures out in the open, but they, with regards to their arsenals of missiles and with their military capabilities, never really hit Israel with a fraction of what they could have hit it. And in fact, the Israelis showed Iran how deep their fingers are into the Iranian state. They assassinated Ismail Haniyeh, rahimahullah ta'ala, Shaheed, in Iran as a diplomatic guest of state. And it was a pinpoint accurate assassination. They knew which room he was in. It wasn't like a big thing that killed a bunch of people, because he was staying in a hotel for the swearing in of the new Iranian president. So they know what's going on inside of Iran. They hit him with pinpoint accuracy. To this day, I don't know, did Iran give him up on purpose in order to tell the Israelis, look, like this is like an offering, peace offering, don't bomb Tehran like you're bombing Beirut? Or if the Israelis did it in order to show them, hey, look, we have our fingers up into your state, don't mess with us. But whatever ended up happening that, the Israelis bombed Lebanon, Beirut as well, so hard that even the Christian allies of Hezbollah abandoned them. And now Hezbollah is set to implode, and Iran refused to send all of the might of their proxies against the Israelis in southern Lebanon. And so they forced them to negotiate a ceasefire. People say, oh, look, the Lebanese forced the Israelis to negotiate a ceasefire. I don't think that's what happened. Because if you look at the terms of ceasefire, they're extremely onerous against the Hezbollah. The Hezbollah wanted to retake land that they had lost in previous conflicts. They ended up having to cede all the land south of the Litani River, which is some of their most some of their greatest strongholds and some of their greatest centers of support, that they have to give them up to the Lebanese army, and they have to get out of there. And that the Israelis can stay there for 2 months. And even after penning the agreement, the Israelis have been violating the ceasefire on a daily basis, several times a day. And Iran is not doing anything to back up their allies. And so what ended up happening is what? Is that the Hezbollah has to recall its forces from the occupation of Syria and shore up its support, because it's about to implode as an organization. And so, coming back to Jawlānī, one of the reasons he's the commander of that group is because of all of the different factions. Most of them were kind of amorphous. He was the only one within his faction had a solid bureaucracy, didn't only have a military structure, command structure, but he also had a government structure as well. And they were dependable in terms of their solid command structure. Now, some people will say this is because he's ruthless. What is a government except for something that monopolizes violence? I'm not justifying anything. I know I saw a video of a British brother who apparently was victimized at the hands of the Hayat Tahrir, not Hayat Tahrir Sham, maybe Hayat Tahrir Sham, but of the bureaucracy of Jawlānī in the Jabhat al-Nusra. And so he put out his video and things like that. And I don't know, Allah knows best, what people are saying. I have a good opinion of everybody. So maybe he's telling the truth or whatever. But the thing is that, the way governments work, it's more than just one person. It's a whole bureaucracy. Sometimes what happens is that you have to keep people into line. Otherwise things don't function. Things don't function properly, because if everyone's doing what they want to do, like a state cannot function. So what happens is, one of the reasons that the other groups kind of looked toward him and ceded the authority to him is because he was able to control what was going on in his organization, in his command structure, and in the lands that he had. So what seems to me happened is that the Lebanese, because they're imploding and they had to call their forces back, the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, with their Turkish backers, because what's in it for Turkey here? People say, oh, it's a cynical play from Turkey. It's not a cynical play. There's millions of Syrian refugees in Turkey, and Turkey's economy is buckling. And it's difficult, like you have to, look, people see like a YouTube video of like a Turk being racist against a Syrian refugee, and it breaks all of our hearts. It's not cool. I'm not okay with it. But you have to understand as well, with the number of people in all of the big cities in Turkey, the rents are so high The cost of living is so high, the food is so high, because you have cities that have demand on them that's like double, triple the infrastructure that they were built for. And so what's going to happen? Someone who's poor, who wants to get married, who has to pay medical bills, who has, pay for school, who is an orphan, is this, is that. Those people are going to get upset. They're going to be angry. Someone is an ill-tempered person anyway. They snap first before other people snap, right? So you can yell at individuals for not being nice, but system-wide, you need to relieve the stress off of the system in order to help both groups of people, Turks and Syrians, live happily, much like I mentioned about Afghan refugees in Pakistan. And so, yeah, Turkey has a huge interest in what? Allowing the Syrians who want to go back home to be able to go back to their homelands instead of having to live in Turkey as a citizen in a foreign land. And so they coordinated with one another, and Jawlānī seems to be the head of this group. Wallahu alam, it doesn't seem that he's the Al-Qaeda, whatever terrorist guy that Tankies are making him out to be, and some of the people on social media are making him out to be. And this brings me, why? Because they have truths in their group that they're going to tolerate one another, Sufi and Salafi, Ash'ari and Athari, and all these other groups as well that are there with them. Coming to this issue of Tankies, this is one of the reasons that I made this video. It's one of the last things I want to say, because this thing has already gone on longer than I had anticipated it would go. When I say Tanki, what do I mean? There are a group of people in America, academics, intellectuals, and media personalities, and even some politicians, although not in America so much, more in the UK, that are anti-imperialist, that are against the hegemony of the United States and Western Europe in the world, anti-colonialist, and they have cast lot with anyone who fights against that system, and they have identified Russia and the Russians as, before the Soviets and now the Russians, as being the most potent enemy to that system. And it's not 100% baseless prognostication, in the sense that you see like BRICS, right? Brazil and China and Russia and India, and they want to form this kind of like anti-Western economic bloc where they could buy and sell and not be held hostage to the dollar and to the SWIFT banking system and all this other stuff that can, at the flip of a switch, cut off economies from access to goods that they need for stability. I get all of that. That's fine. I get all of that. However, they are willing to lie, cheat, steal, and excuse murder from that adversary. Why? Because their hope is that it's going to fight against this one. And that's their agenda, right? We're Muslims. We're not there to allow anyone to lie, anyone to cheat, anyone to steal, anyone to murder, anyone to oppress, anyone to rape, anyone to do any of these things. And we have our own agenda as well. One of the dumbest things I hear people say, they're like, oh, well, if the Syrians overthrow the Assad regime, it's just going to become like another Libya. What's the problem with Libya? You know what the problem with Libya is? The meddling of foreign powers. If the Russians weren't in Libya, do you think it would be Libya? If the Emirat wasn't meddling with it, do you think it would be Libya? If the Turks weren't meddling in it, do you think it would be Libya? If look at Sudan, and I think with the Turks, I give them a little bit of a pass. Why? Because at least the Ottomans ruled Libya as a part of their empire, whereas the Emiratis and the Russians don't want to integrate it into their system. They just want to destabilize it for certain specific things they want out of it. Look at Sudan, the RSF versus the national military. It's the same thing. People are dying. Why? Because of, just like small petty economic and political concerns. Nobody's actually trying to integrate it into a system in which they give people a better standard of living. And so, coming back to this idea that you're going to turn it into a Libya, the reason I don't like this, this way of talking is what? Look, freedom is not easy. Freedom is always difficult. And if you want to achieve freedom, you're going to have to balance a number of things that are very difficult to balance. You're going to have to fight a number of enemies that don't want to see you successful and are happy to see you roll over so that they can bite and eat chunks out of your brain like a zombie. It doesn't mean you give up trying. And as Muslims, it doesn't mean that we give up trying for our own freedom, for our own dignity, for our own autonomy, and so that we can live the lives that we want to live and we can have the objectives politically that we want to see borne out. And so, back to these Tankies, what happens is that, Muslims coming out of the post 9/11 era and coming out of the post, Iraq War era in America, we're so used to everyone just looking at us and saying terrorist, and everyone just looking at us and treating us like horribly. Like Muslims are more hated in this country than Jews, Muslims are more hated in this country than gays, Muslims are more hated in this country than illegal immigrants. We're so used to that whenever someone said something just a little bit nice to us, because we are like in this kind of inverted self-esteem vortex, that we're like, huh, really? Are you my mother? And so all of a sudden, the Tankies who have used Gaza as a beating post in order to denounce the neoliberal hegemony of the United States and of the West, of the Western Europe, of England and France. Just a megaphone by which they can announce to the world how horrible Israel is, and how horrible this Western system is, and how wonderful of an alternative Russia is. And those people are always, for example, they have a very pro-Russia stance in the Ukraine war. I don't have a pro-Russia or a pro-Ukraine stance. That's their problem. Let them fight it. It's not my problem in the first place. I can see both sides of the issue. I don't think it's a moral issue, right or wrong, one way or the other. But they're the ones who are always pro-Russia in all things. Because they're pro-Russia, because Iran and its militias were integrated into that pro-Russia arc and into that pro-Russia axis that envisions itself as some sort of a pillar to give the world a new anti-Western imperial order, they have basically gone on. People like Max Blumenthal, sadly people like Scott Ritter, who was a man who spoke great truth at great cost to himself, but he got caught up in this group. People like a lot of the secularist Arabs, Ali Abu Ni'ma from Electronic Intifada, people like, just the list is very long. This list of Tankies basically turned, and they're acting with the Muslims like the Democratic Party was acting with the Muslims. They're saying, oh, look, you guys voted for Trump. We hope that Trump turns Gaza into a parking lot. And that you ragheads all get deported where you come from. Now we're hearing the exact same things from the Tankies about Muslims that want Syrians to be free and not to have to live under a repressive regime that disrespects their religion and that jails without right and that puts them down. So we don't want to live in it. Why is it that one group of people have the right to aspire to freedom and autonomy, and another group of people doesn't? And you know what? I don't care anymore. You don't think I should be free? Good for you, get lost. What do I care what you think about anything? Look, I'm the one who makes the choice for myself. Do I want to be free or not? And I choose to be free even if everyone hates me for it. And I'm the one who chooses not to be a slave, and even if everyone hates me for not being a slave, who cares? We have to ourselves imbibe this attitude into ourselves. And don't believe everything you hear. Look at this whole long recording, how many disclaimers I made, that I might be wrong about this, I might be wrong about that. Whereas on the flip side, there are people who are so in love with this kind of Iranian sectarian militia ideology, or this anti-Wahhabi ideology. Right? I'm also not a fan of Wahhabi theology, but I don't also have this weird axe to grind where I believe that everything's some sort of Wahhabi conspiracy or whatever. Some sort of Salafi conspiracy. People who have an axe to grind in all of these things, they will quote to you hadith about the end times that speak in general terms as if this one hadith is 100% about this one thing that's happening today, right now. And that's irresponsible. Look, there are some hadiths, like there's a hadith about the Imam Mahdi, that he will appear in Makkah Mukarramah and he will claim that he's the Mahdi, and people will take bay'ah with him. They'll take the oath of allegiance, and then an army from Syria will be dispatched to go fight him, and that army will be swallowed up in the earth at Bayda between Sham and between Makkah Mukarramah. Okay, when you see someone claims he's the Mahdi and people take an oath of allegiance with him and an army comes to fight him and it gets swallowed up by the earth, you can say this is what the hadith means. But hadiths that talk about things that are generalities that have happened many times in the past and might happen many times in the future, and you're not 100% sure what it is. People who talk with yaqeen, why? Because they're trying to push their own sectarian grudges, they're trying to push their own political ideologies, they're trying to push their own economic policies. Some of them are just losers who nobody wants to hear them speak. And so they just want to have an audience or someone to speak to them. All of these groups of people, who cares what they have to say? Leave them alone. Tankies and commies and someone who his brother-in-law does business with Bashar, or what? These people, leave them alone. Leave them alone. People want to do what they want to do, let them do what they want to do. You as a Muslim, listen to the people who speak Arabic when talking about Arabs. Listen to the people who've been to Sham and the people of Sham. So you're not from Sham. Go ask the Syrians that you know. Go ask the people from Halab that you know. What's going on in Halab right now? Ask the people who are pro-government as well, but ask the people who are pro-rebel as well. Make up your own mind, make up your own decision, talk to those people. I'm telling you right now, those Salafis, they're also your brothers. Some of them are wrong. Some of them are violent. Go talk to them. Use the Quran and the Hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. The Khawarij themselves, as long as they weren't fighting the Muslims, Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu dispatched Abdullah bin Abbas radiallahu anhuma to go and to argue with them and to debate them. And he said specifically, use only the Quran as a dalil because they don't accept your Hadith, because they don't consider you to be reliable narrators. So Sayyidina Abdullah bin Abbas would beat them, he'd best them in arguments only using the Quran. Abu Hanifa would debate with the Khawarij only using the Quran, and he would best them. Go, they're your brothers, they're part of your millah, at least culturally they're Muslims, go talk to them. Iran should have, if they believe their Shiite theology is so good, go send your preachers to talk to the Sunni populace, convince them, like the Tablighi Jamaat comes door to door with their 6 points, go with them. Someone will accept it, someone will reject it. Why you have to arm people from Parachinar and from like the tribal areas of Pakistan to travel halfway across the world in order to fight another Muslim? And then afterward they're like, oh, why are these rebels fighting against the axis of resistance? How come they can't go and fight Israel? Have you seen where they live? They're in Idlib, they live in Halab, they're in Idlib, they live in Hama, they're in Idlib, they live in Hims. They're just trying to take their home first. Literally their homes are on the way to Palestine. And to pretend somehow or another that the Israelis are arming them or that they even knew that this was going to happen is completely delusional. It's completely delusional. If anything, Hamas was more in favor of them, and they had to make peace with the Bashar government. Why? Because it was a political fact that the revolution seemed like it was over. If you want to say, oh look, they took funding from the Israelis, therefore they're all Zionists, right? It's true. Al-Qaeda and ISIS took funding for some military support and training from America and from the Israelis at different points in the past. It's true. It seems like it's true. I mean, I wasn't there, but it seems like it's true. Hey, that's how war is. If you're at your wit's end and you're going to die, you take support from wherever you can take it. I'm not saying it's good or right or wrong, but I'm just saying it doesn't necessarily mean that their undying loyalty is there for Zionism until the day of judgment just because that happened. What's another example of an organization that took a lot of funding and a lot of support from Israel? Hamas. Hamas in its very beginning, when Israeli intelligence found out that Hamas is a thing, they actually sent them support. Why? Because they thought if we puff these guys up, they'll fight with the PLO. Because the PLO seems to have a very strong unifying effect on the politics of the Palestinian people. Obviously, they're not doing that anymore, right? So don't be stupid, don't be simple-minded. Think about things a little bit more deeply. And if you disagree with someone you consider to be a Muslim, go talk to them. Go live with them. Hear what they have to say. Hear what their problems are. You don't have to agree with them. You might still not agree with them, but some things you'll at least understand where they're coming from, and you'll understand how to fix it afterward. And if still, your problems are irreconcilable, it happened even between the companions, radiallahu ta'ala anhum, right? But they still didn't lose a basic modicum of brotherhood in deen. That Sayyidina Muawiyah radiallahu anhum, the Romans wrote to him. They said, hey, we heard that Ali is giving you a hard time. Why don't we send an army and we'll help you take care of him? Sayyidina Muawiyah radiallahu anhu, they picked Muawiyah. Why? Because they thought he was the weaker link. They had their intelligence guys. They know Ali is not going to even give them time of day, radiallahu ta'ala. So they thought Muawiyah is the weaker link. He's the politician amongst the two. Let's go talk to him. Even Sayyidina Muawiyah radiallahu ta'ala who the Shia reviled, wal-'iyadhu billah, and he's bari from their accusations against him. He even responded to the Romans and said that Ali is a cousin of mine. This is an issue I have between, it's a family issue we have between one another, and we'll work it out on our own. And we don't appreciate you trying to get in between our family affairs. And if you write a letter like this again, I'll put aside my differences with him, and the two of us will come for you. Me and you are not going to come for him. The two of us are going to come from you. For you, our armies will show up at Constantinople. That's how the Muslims were. That's how the Muslims need to be. The militias from Iran and from Lebanon and from these places, why are the Syrians not going to fight them? Because they need to get back into their homes. They literally need to get back into their homes. Man qutila duna malihi famata mata shahidan. Whoever died defending his property, that person dies as a shaheed. The hadith of the Prophet ﷺ is very clear. It's extremely clear. So, think about these things with a clear head. Even if then you don't support them, that's fine. We're still Muslims or whatever. I disagree with you strongly, but at least think about it. Rather than parroting the kafir tanky talking points or the Iranian propaganda that's only there to support Iran. They even pulled the plug on Hezbollah in the face of the enemy because they were afraid that their own lands were going to get bombed. Iran is looking after Iran, Turkey is looking after Turkey, everyone is looking after themselves. You're not running a government, I'm not running a government. I'm pretty sure no one who's that politically important is going to listen to what I have to say, so alhamdulillah. You're still important to Allah Ta'ala, and what did Allah Ta'ala create your heart for? He created your heart for having love for the Ummah of Islam, for love for the believers. Just like Allah Ta'ala says, whoever makes an enemy of a wali of mine, I declare war on him. Just like that, the person who loves a wali of Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, Allah Ta'ala loves that person as well. So think and have some love and some sympathy for those people, even the ones that you don't agree with, and even the ones that are, don't perfectly fit within your box of what, you think that they should be or shouldn't be or whatever, and listen to people, try to understand where they're coming from. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give all of us tawfiq. Wa sallallahu tabarak wa ta'ala wa sallam ala Sayyidina Muḥammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. If you benefited from this, as much of a doofus as I feel like for saying it, please like and subscribe this channel for no cost. Instruction in basic Islamic sciences, and also discussions like this which try to help people make sense of a confusing world around them in light of the guidance of the Kitab and Sunnah, in light of the guidance of the sacred creed and the sacred law and the spiritual path toward Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that are the shining gifts that were left for us by the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and with which we hope to reach Allah ta'ala and meet Him as happy and pleased and beloved to Allah ta'ala on the Day of Judgment people. Wa sallallahu ta'ala ala rasulihi Sayyidina Muḥammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.